Welcome to the new school year with Montgomery Public Schools. You are viewing the presentation, Social Studies Back to School Informational Webinar. The theme for Montgomery Public Schools this year is moving MPS forward. We want to support this effort by moving social studies forward. We all want to meet the end goal of having students college and career ready so they may move forward in their life. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." Let's all make a commitment right now to do whatever it takes to keep our students moving forward. Welcome back. I hope you had a fantastic summer. I'm Karen Atkins, and I currently serve as the Education Specialist for Social Studies and Advanced Placement for Montgomery Public Schools. You may reach me at IP 70266 if I can provide assistance. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with you this year. The purpose of this informational webinar is to develop a common awareness of the instructional expectations established by Montgomery Public Schools in order to create a student-centric instructional environment that encompasses standards-based high-quality instruction, provides equitable learning opportunities, establishes high expectations, launches active learning experiences, and supports digital usage in a well-managed learning setting. The outcomes are as follows. Read these aloud. Let's begin looking at our first two outcomes. Locate social studies curriculum frameworks and understand the design and utilization expectations of the curriculum frameworks. The MPS curriculum frameworks for social studies are stored within the MPS intranet. To locate these, you need to go to the MPS homepage. You need to go to the MPS homepage and select for employees. From the drop-down menu, select Inside MPS. When this page populates, you will see 4 tabs in the upper left-hand corner. Select Documents. From that, you will see a series of folders. Select the Curriculum and Instruction folder. It will open to subfolders. The K-5 curriculum frameworks for elementary social studies is found in the Elementary Social Studies folder. The 6 through 12 curriculum frameworks for courses and grades 6 through 12 are found in the Secondary Social Studies folder. Click on either of those for the course or grade span you teach. Once inside, you will see a folder titled 2018-2019 Social Studies Curriculum Frameworks and Pacing Guides. By clicking on that folder, you will then have access to the PDF copies for the course or grade level subject areas. When clicking on that, it will generate the actual curriculum framework for your grade span. The Montgomery Public Schools Social Studies Instructional Framework has several components. The first component is the Alabama Course of Study Standard. The second is additional teaching resources. The third is academic vocabulary. The fourth are broad learning targets. The next is overarching essential questions or guiding questions. And the last is a column for noting which reading and writing standard for literacy and history has been incorporated with the core content social studies standard. The standards are taken directly from the Alabama course of study for each grade level and content area. The content standards describe what a student should know and be able to do by the end of a grade level or course. Standards address what is fundamental to the content. Instructional pacing is outlined. This provides each teacher with the expected schedule for teaching the standard. All standards are expected to be taught. All standards are expected to be taught during the time frame outlined on the established curriculum frameworks. Looking at additional teaching resources. The resources listed under this column are a starting point for instruction, not a mandate limiting instructional materials. Teaching resources reflect where lessons and other supplemental materials for particular standards may be located. The change from textbook-driven to standards-based instruction is an important shift in the teaching paradigm. Professional teacher judgment is a vital component for building resources to meet the needs of all students. Resources listed in this column may not be available at all schools, and some may require a subscription. Check with your local school to determine which resources are available. Next, we have academic vocabulary. Understanding and appropriate use of vocabulary is essential to mastering standards, concepts, and integrating knowledge. The knowledge of words and word meaning is tandem to comprehension. As students get older, we expect them to read text that is more complex, which means the student's vocabulary must expand and grow. Academic vocabulary is provided to establish a basic, non-exhaustive listing of terms that students must know and be able to use in order to master given standards. Vocabulary instruction should include, but not be limited only to those terms provided. Learning targets. Let's take a closer look at what learning targets are. What is a standard and what is a learning target? A standard is what we want students to be able to know and do at the end of any given time. Standards are provided by the state and derived from the national standards. Look at the example of a standard from Civics 7C3. Read that standard to yourself. Learning targets. These are statements of intended learning based on the standards. Learning targets are in kid-friendly language and are specific to the lesson for the day and directly connected to the assessment. Read the examples of learning targets provided at the bottom. Learning objectives versus learning targets. Learning objectives are teacher-focused. They're written from the point of view of the teacher, whereas learning targets are students-focused and they're written in student-friendly language. Learning objectives unify outcomes across a series of related lessons or a unit, where learning targets are within a specific lesson. They describe a lesson-sized chunk of information and/or skills. Learning objectives guide instruction. They remind the teacher which lessons to design and in what sequence. Learning targets guide learning of the students. They remind a student what they will be able to do next. Why learning targets? There are 5 research-based strategies that significantly improve student learning. Learning targets is at the top of those, followed by questioning, feedback, peer assessment, and self-assessment. Sharing criteria make learning targets one of the most significant to improve student learning. Why should you create and share learning targets? The quality of learning experience is enhanced when a teacher seriously thinks about the focus and purpose of a lesson. Students are more likely to perform when they know why they are doing what they are doing, and learning targets help stakeholders become partners in the overall learning environment and contribute to its success. Remember, learning targets are statements of what we want students to learn or know or understand and be able to do. Figure 1 shows the framing of learning targets from the student's point of view. There are 3 columns. Guiding question is in the first column, description for young students is in the second column, and description for older students is in the third column. Also, you have guiding questions addressed in each row. In the first row, the guiding question asks, what will I be able to do when I finish the lesson? The second row, what idea, topic, or subject is important for me to learn and understand so that I can do this? And the third row, what will I do to show that I can do this, and how well will I have to do it? Review the descriptions for the young student and the older student to get an idea of how the framing of the learning targets look from the student's point of view. This information was taken from Knowing Your Learning Target by Moss, Brockett, and Long. For the description of the older child, when you look at what will I be able to do when I finish the lesson, that child states with I can statement, I can explain the impact of Ross Perot, a third-party candidate, had on the election of President Clinton. Then it goes into what they must learn and understand. To do this, they must have an understanding or knowledge of the characteristics of a third-party candidate, the United States economic conditions in 1992, and Ross Perot's platform and financial resources. In the end, what will they have to do to show they know this, and how well will they have to do it? They have turned this into the expectation for the writing prompt or the task. I will show I can do this by writing an essay explaining 3 significant impacts Ross Perot had on the 1992 U.S. presidential election and supporting my points by documenting facts from a valid and reliable source. Why learning targets? Learning targets frame the work for the teacher. They provide a framework for teaching. The learning target guides instruction across the gradual release of responsibility. A well-written learning target ensures the teachers can explicitly teach and model the important performance criteria necessary for learning, providing the appropriate practice opportunities, and assist in monitoring student progress and sharing purposeful and actionable feedback. Learning targets provide direction. Students need clear step-by-step processes with check-in activities and ongoing assessment and feedback that support them toward clear goals. Learning targets provide clarity. Learning shouldn't be a guessing game. The greatest student achievement is supported by clarity of instruction. They provide understanding. Students should be able to read and articulate what we want them to know, understand, and be able to do. Learning targets provide assessment. A well-designed learning target provides the performance criteria that describe mastery. Components of effective learning targets. They're visible. They're posted and easy to see. They're understandable. They're written in student-friendly language. They're aligned to standards. The standards are unpacked to describe student proficiency so they can meet standard goals over time. They're actionable. They clearly outline the performance criteria that must be understood and the methods of demonstration to show understanding. They're scaffolded. They incrementally build on previous learning and provide options for students at varied levels of mastery. They're gradually released. The teacher explicitly teaches and models the demonstration of learning in whole group, creates opportunities for practice in small groups, and provides a way for students to individually show they have mastered it independently. They're measurable. Performance criteria can be monitored and assessed through multiple methods, including observation, conferencing, reading, writing, and collaborative work. They're student-owned. Students can articulate what they are learning and how they will meet the performance criteria. The checklist for learning targets. Are the targets measurable at the end of the lesson? Are the targets tied to context that students will perceive as relevant and interesting? Are the daily learning targets aligned to larger performance goals or targets? Standards give the teacher a destination. Learning targets are the route students take to reach that destination. Essential questions direct your choices in content and processes and are also an important component of quality teaching and learning. Comprehensive, well-crafted questions ground intellectual pursuits, giving students some sense of direction and purpose and relevance as they are engaged in the work of the subject. Good questions direct students to dig deeper into content and processes and delve deeper into a subject or the content. More importantly, they propel students to learn to ask their own questions. And within a subject, they help focus content on the crucial and important parts of that subject. Essential questions can also help teachers organize course content and direct their instructional choices about what to include and what to omit. Essential questions are often tools for creating clarity and precision and for communicating pivotal parts of ideas, subjects, or disciplines. As students problem solve, read, inquire, sift, and sort related knowledge and skills, essential questions become endpoints, beacons to final destinations, and landmarks for marking the way. The last column is for documenting and integrating the reading and writing standards for literacy and history. The reading and writing standards for literacy and history are to be integrated throughout the content standards and methods of instructional delivery in social studies. Literacy standards and skills are applied as students acquire information and communicate their learning and understanding in social studies. Integration of literacy and social studies is critical for student success. It is essential that literacy strategies and skills instruction be purposeful and appropriately planned and embedded within the social studies instruction. For example, planning for the literacy and social studies outcomes, differentiating, matching instruction to the learners, and in consideration of the resources. The role of the teacher is to continually evaluate student performance and examine instructional decisions to ensure that all students are meeting the desired learning outcomes. The literacy strategies, learning targets, and skills provided within this document are meant to serve as the instructional foundation for lesson development. Teachers are encouraged to incorporate additional literacy strategies and skills that are aligned to the standards and best support instructional resources being utilized. Reading and writing literacy standards for social studies can be found in Appendix C of the Alabama Course of Study Social Studies document. Standards for K-5 reading and history, social studies, science, and technical subjects are integrated into the K-5 reading standards. These CCRS anchor standards and high school standards in literacy work in tandem to define college and career readiness expectations. In addition to having literacy standards for history for reading and writing, we must also integrate technology standards. The Alabama Course of Study Technology Education provides the framework for the grades K-12 study of technology in Alabama public schools. Content standards in this document define the minimum requirement according to the Code of Alabama. They are fundamental and specific, but not exhaustive. The MPS Office of Educational Technology has identified the following standards that should be integrated into the core curriculum over the school term as follows on the next slides for grade spans K2, 3-6, 6-8, and 9-12. Documentation of incorporation of these identified standards must be kept on file. Targeted technology standards for grades K2 are standards 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Read over those now. Targeted technology standards for grades 3 through 5 have been identified as 2, 5, 6, 8, and 12. Read over those now. Targeted technology standards for grades 6 through 8 include 2, 5, 8, and 11. Read over those now. And standards 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 have been specified for grades 9 through 12. Read over those now. Read the comment strip above. It must be remembered that the purpose of education is not to fill the minds of students with facts. It is not to reform them or amuse them or make them expert technicians in any field. It is to teach them to think, if that is possible, and always to think for themselves. As we begin to plan for how to help students think for themselves, we have to look at the learning cycle, which includes planning, teaching, monitoring, and adjusting. And before we actually sit down and create a lesson plan, we need to think about all the aspects that go into each of these areas. And remember, it's a continuous cycle. Let's look at some of the things that we have to think about when planning. We have to select the Social Studies Core Content Standard. We have to be able to unwrap the standard. We have to analyze the content standard for key concepts and essential vocabulary. We have to determine the cognitive demand. We have to identify literacy and writing standards and the technology integration standards. We have to be able to create a prompt or a task that assesses the cognitive demand and the depth and breadth of the standard. We have to locate text and different resources. We have to identify skills for each lesson component. We have to be able to establish overarching learning targets and targets for each lesson component. We have to look at the strategies that will be used to best meet the teaching of those skills. We have to align formative assessments and plan for checks for understanding. And we also have to determine what evidence will be utilized to measure if the students have attained what we've set out for them to establish. Then, once we think about all those aspects of planning, we have to look at how are we going to teach those. Teaching could involve aspects from explicit instruction, learner-centric environments, differentiated instruction, gradual release of responsibility, active engagement, checks for understanding, talking, reading, writing, investigating, and listening, discourse, text-dependent questions, shifts in instructional mode, formative assessments, small group, whole group, scaffolding, and chunking. One way we can see the impact of scaffolding and chunking is when we look at this one activity. If you're asked to locate the outline of the 5-pointed star, it's quite cumbersome when you look at all the designs that are there. So to better enable a student to meet the learning target, we can scaffold or chunk the material. One way to do that is offer one portion at a time and give them time to digest it. With half of it, he's better able to process. But breaking it down even further gives us a better chance at success. When you're able to chunk and scaffold the material for the students, they're able to process it in smaller chunks, are able to integrate and process it. Within that, you're then able to identify and meet the target that has been established. Rick Stiggins states that teachers and students can hit any target they can see and will hold still. Looking at this, when we're planning, we need to ensure that the learning targets and the instructional foundations that we put in process to meet those learning targets are better aligned to offer the best instructional practices possible. After we plan and we teach, we have to monitor. Here are some of the aspects we have to think about when looking for monitoring. We have to do checks for understanding, formative assessments, summative assessments, progress monitoring, questioning, and response to intervention. What other aspects for monitoring can you think of? Share those with your group now. After thinking about planning, teaching, and monitoring, we must also be able to adjust. The adjustment in the instructional phase is the way that we can best meet the needs of all learners. The following aspects are things to consider when you're planning for adjusting: formative assessment, feedback, wait time, reteaching. Need to ask if you need to clarify the intended outcome of instruction by talking about the nature of the targeted curricular aim, or focusing on evaluative criteria that will be used to judge the quality of the performance. Do you need to review prior learning progression choices by determining if an earlier key building block had been omitted, or deciding if an adjustment trigger levels for previous building blocks were too low? Do you need to provide additional modeling by distributing and using a detailed rubric or performance model, conducting a demonstration, or assigning heterogeneous partner work with a struggling student which works with a buddy? Or do you need to provide additional guided or independent practice by setting small group practice, assigning new homework problems? Now we've reflected on all the components and aspects of the learning cycle when you're beginning to plan, teach, monitor, and adjust. We want to be able to apply that to the actual lesson plan. But before we do, let's reflect on what Harry Wong stated. He said that learning has nothing to do with what the teacher covers. Learning has to do with what the students accomplish. So that should be the end goal of our lesson plan. We want to set it up and establish it so that students are successful and can accomplish mastery of the standards that we've taught. Utilizing this slide, you may be wondering, where are we going with all this? Well, we're taking all this to be able to plan a social studies lesson utilizing the new lesson planner. When we look at this, it is quite extensive, and this is our expanded version. I will also share with you a compact version as well as a sample lesson plan. This expanded version is something we want to work toward throughout the school year. We don't expect you to be able to implement and accurately fill out every section of this at the beginning of the school term. There are certain aspects that will be contained with the compact version that you will be expected to address. But the learning goal is for us to be able to, at the end of the year, create a successful literacy-based lesson plan that will address social studies core concepts. So let's just take a look at all the aspects associated with this. Of course, you're going to put your name, the content topic, the subject, the school, and what assignment you're giving. Then we want to look at making sure we have incorporated all of the components. You're going to start with your social studies core content standard. You're going to identify reading standards for literacy and history, writing standards for literacy and history. You're going to add speaking and listening standards as appropriate. You're going to incorporate technology. You want to refer to the identified or specified targeted standards and make sure that you are incorporating them within lessons when appropriate. You want to create overarching learning targets. You want to create overarching essential questions. You want to think about how you're going to tier instruction, plan for intervention, differentiation, small groups, how you'll address the exceptional learners in ESL, what type of assessment and homework will be needed. There's a place for you to list all of your resources and texts that will be used. Please remember when we're referring to text that we're not just talking about textbooks or written information. Text can refer to any resources that will help you be able to address information, primary or secondary resources. It can be graphs, charts, pictures, videos, those sorts of items. Then what we're working on is we want to develop a final product from the task based on the standard so we can assess it and determine if students have met mastery of the standard through their performance within that task or writing prompt. We will walk through the stages to be able to do that, so on your lesson plans, even in the compact version, you will be able to create a writing prompt or task. Then we want you to be able to identify the cognitive demand of the standard. We want you to establish the writing mode and fill in templates that will address and create the writing product or prompt from. We want to establish consecutive skills that will be addressed in every lesson plan for social studies when students are engaging with the text or in the reading process. The first of those is essential vocabulary. You want to address the essential vocabulary by establishing a learning target, identifying the strategy that will be utilized to work with that skill, and also developing the formative assessment. Additional components that will be addressed through skills in every lesson will be annotating text, reading for understanding, note-taking, and discourse. And through those, by the end of this school term, we will be able to incorporate all those and identify learning targets, appropriate strategies, and effective formative assessment for each of these components as well. And then finally, from that, we will develop a writing prompt or task that the students will respond to indicate mastery, or should I say successful mastery, based on the criteria you establish. Let's take a look at the MPS Social Studies Lesson Plan Template, the condensed version. It is the expectation that this will be the planning template that teachers will utilize now until further training is provided on the extended version. The components include the Social Studies Core Content Standard, the Reading Standard for Literacy and History, the Writing Standards for Literacy and History, Technology Integration, the Writing Prompt, Learning Targets, Essential Questions. In that, we will plan more purposefully for the lesson components of essential vocabulary skills, annotating text skills, reading for understanding skills, note-taking skills, an extra or additional information and text strategy, and discourse. For these, teachers are asked to purposefully align a strategy that will reach the intended goal set forth in their lesson for each of those components, as well as establish formative assessments for each of those. It is wise to remember that opportunities for reading, writing, talking, listening, investigating, and processing should occur during each lesson component. These lesson components are not taught in isolation. Teachers will also need to think about tiered instruction, intervention, differentiation, and small groups, as well as how to address exceptional learners and ESL students. They need to provide for assessments and homework as well. To begin doing this, you have to make sure that you can unwrap your standard. To unwrap the standard, you have to circle your verbs. This indicates the cognitive demand at which the students will perform. You underline the teachable concepts. These are the important noun phrases or nouns, and this provides information on what the students must know. And then you bracket the criteria or conditions. This is additional content or extent of what should be taught. Let's take a look and apply this to the Civic Standard 7.C3. Compare the government of the United States with other governmental systems. When we look at this, we want to circle the word compare because that's our cognitive demand. That's the verb. That's the action at which level the students have to perform. Then we want to look for the noun or noun phrases because this is the content of what the students must learn. The noun or noun phrases in this standard is the government of the United States with other governmental systems. Then we want to bracket the additional or extent. In addition to the United States government systems, the students must also be able to compare each of these additional governmental systems with that of the United States. This is giving us a breakdown or unwrapping of our standard. Let's take a look at the sample social studies lesson plan. The core content standard for social studies has been identified as compare the government of the United States with other governmental systems. The reading standards for literacy have been identified as 6 through 8.1. Site-specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary source. 6 through 8.2. Determine information of primary or secondary source and provide an accurate summary of knowledge. The writing standards have been established as well. Read those to yourself. Technology integration has been identified based on the targeted standards that have been supplied from the Office of Educational Technology. They are Standard 7, published digital projects that communicate curriculum concepts, and Standard 8, use digital tools and strategies to locate, collect, organize, and evaluate and synthesize information. The overarching learning target has been identified as students will be able to compare and contrast other forms of governmental systems with that of the United States, focusing on who has the power and how the power is achieved. We also want to begin looking at our overarching essential question. Under which governmental system would you like most to be governed by, and what is your reasoning? Support your discussion with evidence from the text and utilizing comparison and contrast to the various other governmental systems. Our identified core social studies content standard gives us the ability to look at key concepts. Read the key concepts identified from Standard 7.C.3. Now we want to take a look at how we'll address tiered instruction, intervention, differentiation, and small groups. We will scaffold lesson components and chunk information for easier processing during the lesson. We will provide opportunities for rereading and engaging with new learning during teacher-led small group instruction. We will also address exceptional learners in ESL. We will support ELL students by making lessons visual. Use visual representations of new vocabulary and use graphs, maps, photographs, drawings, and charts to introduce new vocabulary and concepts. We'll extend the learning for gifted and advanced students by having them conduct more extensive research regarding the various governmental systems not addressed. Our assessment will be an explanatory informational writing rubric for the product, and we will not assign any homework. Here, we will identify the resources that we will use. For this lesson, we'll be utilizing iCivics.org informational text from Who Rules Lessons resources. We will utilize a mind map for the types of governments. We will identify that government cards. We will utilize the text Who Rules, also utilizing Venn diagram, semantic feature analysis. We will do closed reading notes and analysis, focused text marking codes, and charting and chatting graphic organizer. Our final product will be an Inform Compare essay. As we look, we can establish our cognitive demand based on unpacking our standard. We unpacked it, we noticed the verb was compare. So this is the cognitive demand level that the students will be asked to perform at. We will create a writing product based on our standard. And the final one that we have created states, after reading informational text on the systems of government in the United States, complete an essay in which you compare the U.S. government to other governmental systems, including those listed to identify the other types of governmental agencies. Within this, we want to begin looking at those required components of every social studies lesson. For hooking the students and explaining the task, we will set learning target as I can access prior knowledge to connect new learning. What strategy will be utilized? We will utilize the government cards and the mind map. Before we move on, we want to take a look at how you're able to change your learning target into a writing mode. One of the aspects that you're going to be asked to go ahead and do now on the condensed version of the lesson plan is to take your learning target from your core content social studies standard and convert it into a writing prompt or task. To do that, you need to unwrap the standard like we did when we were working with 7C3, compare the governmental systems of the United States with other governmental systems. We want to identify the cognitive demand of that standard. The cognitive demand was compare. So we look at that on our template. Then we want to decide what type of product this will be, argumentation or informational. With the standard that we're working with and the resources identified, we're going to create one for informational. This is a template where you take specific aspects of your standard, fill in the blanks, and then you have a writing prompt. So let's take a look at what we were actually able to accomplish. We were able to convert the standard 7C3, compare U.S. governmental systems to that of other governmental systems by utilizing the task template, identifying the cognitive demand, and filling in the blanks. So the final writing prompt that the students will respond to will be After reading informational text on the systems of government in the United States, complete an essay in which you compare the United States government to other governmental systems, including the 7 that we have listed there: monarchy, dictatorship, theocracy, and pure democracy. Support your response with evidence from the text. After utilizing our core content standard to develop our writing prompt or task, we want to then put our attention to each of the components of our lesson. When reading or engaging with the text, we want to make sure that we address the skills of essential vocabulary, annotating text, reading for understanding, note-taking, the extra informational text skill, and discourse. You want to think of this part as, instead of having a before, during, and after strategy like you did last year, you want to have more informative and purposeful planning to address a strategy that goes along with each of those component skills. For instance, your essential vocabulary is established from your course of studies standard. Then you establish a learning target. The learning target for the essential vocabulary dealing with the standard 7C3 is I can apply content vocabulary to explain the comparison of the United States government structures to other governments. Then you have to decide what strategy will you use to make sure that you are adequately addressing that skill of essential vocabulary. Here we've chosen the porthole carousel, and this can be found at LDC Core Tools. The LDC library has a vast number of strategies that you can research and pull up to meet each of these different lesson components. Then you have to decide on how you will formatively assess the strategy after it's implemented to determine if the skill set is met. The formative assessment for this section of essential vocabulary is students meet expectations if they participate in their small group discussions and contribute ideas to the posters posted throughout the room, if their small group created illustrations accurately, and if they capture the meaning of their assigned essential vocabulary word, and if their small group is able to explain the meaning of the essential vocabulary word to the class. Next, we want to move on to annotating text, and we want to follow the same process. What will you do to help the students engage with the text to be able to process and synthesize their learning with old information and make sense of what they're thinking? The learning target here is twofold. I can annotate text to determine similarities between various governmental systems, and I can annotate text to determine differences between various governmental systems. The strategy that will be utilized is focused text marking, and the formative assessment will be discussions of text marketing. Again, we're using the LDC library of strategies. However, you may use any of the strategies that adequately meet the expectations of the standard. Let's take a look at the LDC library interface. After doing each of those components, essential vocabulary and annotating the text, we want to repeat these same processes of identifying the learning target, identifying the strategy, and the formative assessment for the other components of our lessons. Reading for understanding. Here the learning target was I can apply textual evidence to show comparisons of worldwide governmental systems to that of the United States. The strategy is closed reading notes and a semantic feature analysis. The formative assessments, students reflect on what they learned about from the content of the text. Students reflect on how they closed reading process supported their understanding of the text, and then they complete a semantic feature analysis of the governmental systems. Then for note-taking, the learning target established was I can apply textual evidence to collect information regarding U.S. government systems compared to those of other governments that will be used to respond to the prompt or task. Then the strategy is the closed reading notes or note-taking. The formative assessment would be students reflect on what they learned about from the content of the text. Here's what the LDC interface looks like. From here, you're able to go through and set filters for you to be able to search for different strategies. You can look for strategies that meet the essential vocabulary. You can look for strategies that address responding to reading. You can look for strategies that address annotating text. There are a variety of different standards here. You can also filter them by grade level. You can filter them by subject. And I will give you the link to this so you can go through and review all of these. However, the strategies that may have been utilized last year, like turn and talk, the Freyer model, jigsawing, all of those are still viable strategies that you may utilize as long as they meet the demand of the skill. These strategy resources may also be referred to as mini tasks instead of strategies, but these are the strategies. When you're looking at any of these and you click on the strategy, it opens it up to a lesson plan and talks to you about what criteria the students need to meet to be successful, and they also offer a lot of times graphic organizers that will go along. We'll take a deeper look at that in just a moment. Then we continue on with discourse. In this, we've stated that every component of the lesson will still have talking, reading, writing, inferring. All of those steps are just good, sound instructional practices. Here, for discourse, you want to find a strategy that will allow the students to synthesize, apply, correct, redefine their information before they begin responding to the writing prompt. So the learning target for discourse is I can synthesize information from text to compare worldwide government systems to prepare for writing tasks. I can work with others to identify significant elements from reading and discourse that will be used in the writing process. The strategy that I chose was charting and chatting. And then formative assessment will teams explain their thinking and perhaps their chosen organizational pattern to their peers during a gallery walk. Now, aspects of all of these strategies that are new that we're sharing can be found in the link with the LDC library. And finally, you want them responding to the writing prompt at the conclusion of all the lesson. Now, the lessons that we're developing may have to take place over more than one class period. In fact, it may take 2 or 3 or 4 class periods for you to complete the entire process from the beginning to the end, especially when you get into them being able to respond to the writing task. For the final product, we want to respond to that prompt that we created from a course standard. And the learning target here is I can integrate relevant text-based evidence and analysis to form paragraphs of an informative essay. The strategy is TBE, writing paragraphs with text-based evidence. And then how they'll be assessed is partner students as they finish. Instruct them to check with a partner that all elements of the essay have been included, the claim that connects the essay, thesis, relevant evidence to prove a claim, citation of the evidence, and reasons. And then if they're able to explain that analysis of the evidence. And we still want to keep in mind that opportunities for reading, writing, talking, listening, and investigating and processing are occurring within each of these phases that we've talked about. And then looking at the end of the lesson plan, you want to evaluate the writing process for the students, but you also want to reflect on your own. Looking at the advanced ed report, we were able to pick out some things that they were showing that weren't necessarily connecting in the classroom. And some of those are listed in this reflection. You're not required to write down the reflection after any of these, but as we begin this new lesson plan process, at the end of each one, go back and think about some of these questions. 1. Opening activities. How well is the opening plan to accomplish one of the following of the activity or lesson? Are you sparking prior knowledge, assessing students' understanding, or build students' interest? That's the reason in the first part of the lesson plan we were asking you to explain the task and hook the students. You need to have a purposeful task for doing that. To meet that skill, you want a strategy. Then 2, new learning introduction. How well does the plan for introducing students to new learning inform them about the following things? The learning target of the lesson and how it's connected to the end goal, and the formative assessment that they will complete at the end of the activity. Well, when you're following this new lesson plan format, your learning targets are within each component, but each of these components are leading you up to being able to respond as a final product to the writing prompt or task that you created from the core content standard. So when we get a little bit further and we're able to look at how we evaluate that writing prompt, we will have a rubric established so it will connect all of these. Number 3, how well does the plan for guided practice engage students in working cooperatively to deepen their understanding of concepts and or strengthen their ability to perform skills? Use text and technology. Meet the needs of exceptional learners and ESL. This is addressed through the learning plan as well, and when you're working with those specific learning targets and you have a specific strategy that meets the skill and the learning target, then all of those things are going to be taken care of. And because you should have the opportunities for students to engage, speak, write, listen, infer, investigate, analyze, and produce during each section, they are having a way to process the information intentionally. Number 4, how well does the plan for assessing students' understanding engage them in applying information and skills to complete a task that is designed to measure their progress toward the learning target? Well, your formative assessment measure should be a gauge as how they're working along to reach mastery of that learning target. Number 5, how well does closing of the activity lesson provide students with a review and connects the day's learning to the end goal? You've got to make sure during that time of the lesson for each component that you're finding a way to summarize and review that so that you can connect all those components together. Again, these were remarks from the last advanced ed report, and we want to make sure that during our instructional time we're specifically addressing these issues that were noted. And if you're following the new social studies lesson plan format, whether the extended form or the condensed form, and you're addressing each of those components of hooking the student and explaining the task, addressing the essential vocabulary, annotating text, reading for understanding, note-taking, discourse, the extra informational text skill, and discourse, then you were able to meet that if you're thoughtfully planning a learning target and then developing the strategy that meets those skills that we've just mentioned. What are the implications of the work for us as teachers? You want to begin with the end in mind, standards, and final assessment. know where the students are, pre-assess to determine prior knowledge, let the students know where they're going, communicate specific and student-friendly learning targets, use time wisely depending on where students are, decide how much time you will spend on each activity and strategy. Now let's take a look at district expectations. First of all, the expectation is that you will teach the standards. You will teach all the standards. The 2010 Alabama Course of Study, Social Studies, provides Alabama students and teachers with a curriculum that contains content designed to promote competence in the areas of economics, geography, history, and civics and government. With an emphasis on responsible citizenship, these content areas serve as the 4 organizational strands for the grades K-12 Social Studies program. This document provides the framework for the grades K through 12 Social Studies program in Alabama public schools. Content standards and related content in this document are minimum and required, according to the Code of Alabama, 1975, Section 1635-4. They're fundamental and specific, but not exhaustive. So MPS requires that all course and/or grade standards are taught. In addition, teachers should create a student-centric instructional environment that encompasses standards-based, high-quality instruction, promotes equitable learning opportunities, establishes high expectations, launches active learning experiences, and supports digital usage in a well-managed learning setting. This requires the inclusion of literacy standards for history and writing as well as those for technology. When we talked earlier and went through the lesson plan template, wanted you to know that there are templates for turning Alabama Course of Study standards into the writing prompt or task by grade span. There's one for kindergarten through first grade that addresses definition, description, explanation, analysis, comparison, and cause and effect. There's a task template for grades 2 through 5 that address definition, description, explanation, analysis, comparison, cause effect, and procedural and sequential. And as we've already looked at, there's a task template for grades 6 through 12, which identify the same 7 as for the previous grade span. Constitution Day. Federal mandates require that all grades, kindergarten through 12th grade, provide instruction, educational programs, and professional development for Constitution Day each year. Constitution Day will be observed September 17, 2018. In 2004, at the urging of the late Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, Congress passed a law designated September 17th as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day. 52 years later, Byrd's law added 2 requirements. The head of every federal agency must provide each employee with educational and training materials concerning the Constitution. Each educational institution that receives federal funds for a fiscal year shall hold an educational program on the Constitution on September 17th. If the date falls on a Saturday or Sunday, the observance shall be held the following week each year. This year, Constitution Day will be observed on Monday, September 17th, 2017. Schools also have the option of incorporating Constitution Day activities into instruction throughout the week of September 17th through the 21st. Constitution Day resources may be found in the Social Studies folder on the MPS intranet. For those of you that teach AP courses, the deadline for the MPS course audit is September 7th, 2018. Now I want to provide you information on additional resources that support instructional processes and student learning. One of those is historical events. The History Place offers a monthly calendar that outlines historical events that have happened throughout history on those dates. To access this, visit www.historyplace.com specials, calendars, and then the month. It is my goal for us to be able to celebrate historical happenings that occur throughout every month. An additional resource that you may not be aware of is the Alabama Learning Exchange, or ALEX. To find resources, click on the Resource tab, and from the drop down, you can go over and locate Courses of Study. And when you go into the Courses of Study, it lists from K-12 all the grade-specific and course-specific standards. And then when you go into a specific grade level or course, it then offers you the standard and provides you with additional learning sources that you can click on and find lesson plans, videos, and learning activities that will correlate with the standard that you are trying to teach. I want to refer you back to the LDC library of strategies. There are many strategies listed in here that you can filter out that will specifically meet the needs of our social studies planner and those components, the skills of essential vocabulary, annotating text, reading for understanding, note-taking, the extra informational text skill, and discourse. And then there are also mini task / strategies that help you when you're wanting to assist the students in completing their writing prompt or task, as well as there are strategies in here for explaining different tasks and hooking students on the lesson. This can be accessed by going to coretools.ldc.org/curriculum library. Another resource available to our students at no cost to them that has been paid for by the State Department are these practice tools from ACT. As you're looking at the diagram, each of the ones in blue are a free resource. Preparing for the ACT includes practice tests in the ACT Academy. You have free practice questions online for ACT Academy. You can locate tips for taking the ACT. You have ACT Online Prep, the ACT Alternate Formative Practice Tests, the ACT Work Keys Curriculum provided by the State Department, Open Ed, and Questions of the Day or Daily Challenges provided by the ACT Academy. It is strongly suggested that students in the correct grade spans for these resources utilize them daily. These resources are available at no cost to the student at a value of over $100. Another resource that's Open Ed is for K through 12th grade. As you can see, the resources that are available there. They're free educational resources all in one place. Another free resource through Open Ed for 9th through 12th graders is them being able to work on the ACT for personalized learning resources. These resources are available at school and at home. Those can be accessed through resource.opened.com/OCAT. There's the ACT Academy that provides resources for kindergarten through 12th grade. This can be accessed at academy.act.org. ACT Online Prep for 11th and 12th graders can be accessed at onlineprep.act.org. And the final resource available for 9th through 12th graders at no cost is the ACT Work Keys Curriculum. There are resources in all of these items for teachers and students. If you need additional training, please see your building test coordinator for additional information. Also, it's nice to note that Montgomery Public Schools will be partnering with the Alabama Shakespeare Festival during this year, and there will be opportunities for our students to participate at all levels of plays that address some of the social studies content that we are expected to teach throughout our content standards. When more information is available on this, I will share it with a particular grade span so that we can make sure that we make this a positive partnering. Another resource for ensuring that we have impactful lessons is beginning to look at the powerful literacy practices offered through the Southern Regional Education Board. These powerful literacy practices outline teacher behaviors, student behaviors, and artifacts that we can utilize that will help us develop and implement a literacy-based assignment. For now, you may want to begin reading this page and the following page to identify teacher behaviors, student behaviors, and artifacts as they apply to the different components of a literacy lesson. We will plan to have additional training on these powerful literacy practices for those schools not involved with SREB at a later time during the year. But go ahead and read through this page and the following to make sure you are becoming familiar with aspects of these teacher behaviors, student behaviors, and artifacts. And before you go, please complete the Google form that provides feedback on today's lesson. Remember, I'm Karen Atkins, and you can contact me at IP 70266 if you have any questions. The new lesson plan format will be posted on the intranet for your access, and if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you for your time.